I have a I have a good microphone just to, so we sound better. Hopefully it sounds
It
better.
sounds very well. Thank you, Sean
Okay, okay.
PECKNOLD. Okay, so Sean PECKNOLD, thank you very much for being here with us on our channel today. And
Of
you've
course.
directed Tennis Oranges, which is part of the official selection. It played in South by Southwest this year, I think, Annecy as well. It's going to have like a premiere in your country in the US next year. It's an amazing animation filming, in my opinion. So could you please tell us a little bit about the film to begin with? The
Thank you.
synopsis, so to say.
Yeah, it's great to be here. Thank you for having our film at the festival and for chatting. Tennis Oranges is a 10-minute stop motion film, primarily about a robotic vacuum cleaner who is bored and doesn't have many friends at this job. He works at a regional hospital, and he quits one day and sets off on a small, quiet street to try and find some elevated sense of connection and purpose and mix life up a little bit, as we all can relate to, I'm sure. And then it gets into themes of isolation and loneliness and aging and time and all those fun things. Yeah. So
Okay, let me ask you about the road. You say in the credits that the story is inspired by time spent on Chungking Road. If I'm not mistaken, that's part of Chinatown in LA. So,
that's right.
w-
Yeah.
w-
So when I first moved to Los Angeles in 2014-ish, around that time, I was similar to the vacuum in the story, trying to find friends and purpose and connection is very common for people moving to a brand new city. And realized that I needed a workspace. And so I went on Craigslist, which is, like the public posting site. I'm sure you know it. And found an old art gallery that was empty on Chungking Road in Chinatown's LA. And I didn't know much about the LA's Chinatown, but we ended up, me and my wife, who's the production designer, Adie Goodrich on Tennis Oranges, we were just starting to hang out. And I was like, I got this studio. Do you want to join the studio and we can make work here and make our projects here? And so that became our main place of existence for about 4.5 years, up until maybe 2018. And so we were there every day, and the film is very much inspired by the street. So in LA, it's very rare to have a pedestrian-only street. I know in Europe and Spain, very common. People walking, enjoying life, very quiet, no cars. In LA, it's cars, cars, parking lots, strip malls, cars. And so it was very nice to have this quiet a street where only people are walking, and there's art and old Chinese residents who've lived there for a while, and the younger generation who's making art and work and things. And we just got to know the street and got to know two friends of ours that kind of loosely inspired the two rabbit characters, because we saw them every day, all day. One would sit in front of her art and gift shop for about 10 hours every day. And the sun would move, and some things on the street changed, but very little, like from day to day, if that makes sense. There were some constant things, like the old man opening the community center, that we could almost set our clock to because it happened so consistently. And I think that inspired us both to want to make a kind of short poetic tribute to that sense of uh, peace and consistency despite chaotic and crazy times that we live in. So that's kind of where it became inspiration for us wanting to make a film. And when we started making it was 2020. And so it became almost like we started without before the pandemic. We wanted to make the film. I had written the short script and drawn all the storyboards, and then as the pandemic started, that's when we were really like able to be like, let's make the short film. Now we finally have some time and quiet to focus on making a 10-minute stop motion short film, which takes a lot of focus. So elements from the pandemic and that new level of isolation and loneliness and uncertainty kind of fed into the film in a new way, which was cool to be able to kind of take something that was inspired by, a very real life thing and then place other things that we were experiencing during the pandemic on it. And I think each collaborator that came in to work on the short, it was a very hard time. You'd have to still wear masks and bring people into our studio, and like we brought in other animators who that was one of my favorite things about the film was to bring in new collaborators because I am a stop motion animator. I'm okay. I'm good, but like not great. Character animation is very hard, and especially stop motion. You're moving these puppets in real life. There's no computers that can aid you. It's you and your hands making the whole thing. So I got to meet about, 7 or 8 new animators that I'd either been fans of or I'd heard about their work. They maybe work on TV shows in LA, or a few had worked on Pinocchio up in Portland, Oregon. So that was really amazing for me to bring them in, and we would always have our sets set up and glowing and ready, and they would come in and they would be like, what is this? Because it's a very small scale production. We didn't have big studio or funding, or some short films even have big footprints and they're a big deal productions, but ours was very small and very quiet, and just we had a glowing room set up for a year, and animators would come in and they'd add their touch to it for 2 weeks or 3 weeks, and then they would go back to
Good,
their other projects.
sorry if I may. Good, they
Eh,
print like their own materials and create their own objects within them.
No, well, we had so our main art director, Emily Franz, was a friend. We had worked on this series for Netflix called Song Exploder, and she made the puppets and a lot of the miniature props. So she was kind of like before the animators would come in, we would make, and my wife is a set designer, so she would design the sets and we would build them with Emily and a few other assistants. So that when the animators would come in, they wouldn't have to build anything, which is nice for them. They would just come in, and it was amazing to see because when I've worked on short projects like this in the past, it's very like not chaotic, but like I only do it when I can, or you do it on the weekends or nights. And this was very like at least I wanted it to feel professional where the animators would come in, they animate for 8 hours, and they're all amazing at that. Like that's a very specific skill where you can come in, listen to headphones, and animate for 8 hours. Everyone has their different way of working. I'm sure a lot of animators stay up late, or if they're on a computer, it works in as they can. But this felt very like not working class, but just like it was 9 a.m. to 5 p.m., like, and the animation is getting, and but then, at the end of a 8 hour day, you might have 1 second of animation. So that's what's really cool about stop motion is it takes place over a long period of time. So our short took about 3 years to make. And so at the end of one day, you might have 2 seconds or 1 second, but like it's beautiful. I mean, I would get home from after a day on set and watch 1 second or 2 seconds. One of our main animators, his name's Alfonso Estrada. He's incredible, and he did most of the dance sequences with the two main rabbit puppets. And when he would, you know, a great animator is able to give a puppet, and I actually have the puppets here. Let me show you.
All right.
It can move in so many different ways, and a great animator can make it seem like this is a real thing with a real spine and a real bone structure, and it can move so fluid. So like that was really cool to see these inanimate objects kind of breathe with life. Um, and also see that each animator has their own style, and that's important to try and maintain consistency with the puppets throughout a 10-minute short. So I would try and figure out like, okay, Alfonso's really good at dancing and these big expressive movements, like focus on those scenes. I was the mostly focused on the vacuum. I didn't do all of the vacuum scenes, but because my tendencies are to animate simpler objects. So I was like, I can do that. And then a few other people, like they were good at walk cycles or, stuff like, or, more textural stuff like the space
Mhm.
sequences. Here's the other puppet. And you can see their scale. They're about 8 inches.
Yeah,
Cool.
yeah.
Um, but yeah, it was a very start and stop production. Like we didn't spend the entire 3 years making the film. It was probably over a course of 3-ish years, but broken up basically when we could find time or the amount of funding we needed to keep bringing in animators or making more sets or making more miniatures. I think if the whole project would have happened consistently in one stretch, maybe it would have been closer to 8 or 9 months. But it's very hard to make shorts in the US. I live in LA and there's a lot of production, but to make artful, strange, beautiful, quiet short films, you're not, it's harder to find financing and funding for that. So you have to kind of Robin Hood and find money where you can to do it, which is, you know,
But you managed to do it, and I think it's a really good film. So thank you very much, and a pleasure.
thank you, Victor. This has been great.